Well, welcome. Thank you very much. It was extremely heartening to hear what the Vice-Chancellor had to say. And indeed, it's extremely heartening to see a summit like this put on, focusing on the gaps that we, as leaders of tomorrow, can regard as opportunities for our progress in biotechnology generally for the good of humanity. I have always believed that the problem of aging is humanity's biggest problem. Ultimately, the largest amount of suffering in the world is caused by ill health, and these days the largest amount of ill health is caused by the diseases and disabilities of old age. There is undoubtedly a huge biomedical gap there, and it is maintained by other gaps. There is certainly a credibility gap. It's already been mentioned that this field is controversial. I was just talking to Professor Winter a moment ago about how Cynthia Kenyon, another very prominent gerontologist, when she was here at the LMB, was viewed with decidedly raised eyebrows. That changed about 20 years ago in a very big way when Cynthia showed that it was possible to manipulate aging genetically in the laboratory. And the credibility gap is continuing to close. Even over the past few years, we've seen, for example, people very hard to ignore, such as Google and Craig Venter, getting into this field in a very big way. And it's much harder to ridicule this field now than it was, well, when I was part of the university, actually, and a certain number of the old guard didn't think much of this field. But there remains another gap. I'm going to characterize it as a conceptual gap, which is proving rather hard to close, and I'm going to spend a little time on it. And in doing so, I hope I'm going to be able to explain this subtitle here that I've put there. So we're all, of course, aware that the population of the UK, and indeed the Western world, and for that matter the whole world these days, is aging sharply. These are statistics from the USA, going from 1950 through to a projection of 2050, and we see that the proportion of the population over the age of 65 goes up from 8% to 22%, an absolutely astonishing rise. Now, I think we sometimes forget that this is a cause for celebration, that what this actually tells us is that very, very much fewer people are dying prematurely in infancy or in childbirth or whatever than they were 50, 100, 200 years ago. That's fabulous. But of course, what tends to overshadow that in our minds is the fact that this has created and exacerbated other problems, namely the fact that people are living long enough to suffer diseases and disabilities with which medicine has so far pretty much failed to come to grips. And this is the paradox that I would like us all to focus on. The fact is we are living, by and large, at least in the West, in a post-tuberculosis world, a post-polio world, a post-smallpox world. We are not living yet in a post-aging world, and something needs to be done about that. The question is, why is it so difficult? And this is the conceptual gap that I want to deal with. If we ask ourselves what is aging, many people will come up with many different answers, but actually it's not particularly controversial. We all here know that this is a perfectly uncontroversial definition of aging. Aging is a side effect of being alive in the first place. Just like any machine with moving parts, the human body inflicts damage upon itself as a side effect of its normal operation. Just like a car or an aeroplane, that damage has no real functional consequence for a long time because the human body is built to tolerate a certain amount of that damage. But eventually the damage accumulates beyond that amount, and that's when the diseases and disabilities of old age emerge and progress. So, what does that mean? What it means is that the conventional understanding of the diseases of old age and their relationship to this thing that we call aging is very misguided, mistaken. I've already mentioned how widespread and staggeringly costly the diseases and disabilities of old age are. But are we right actually to think of them as diseases at all? The fact is, first of all, they're universal. Every single person in this room will get Alzheimer's disease unless you are lucky enough to die of something else first. And this means also that they are not medically curable in the way that an infection is. We cannot simply eliminate the diseases of old age from the body in a manner that will mean they never occur again unless someone is in some way, reinfected because that would require, eliminating being alive in the first place from the body, which would rather defeat the object. So we have to think differently about this, but we do have to think of aging as a medical problem that is, in principle, preventable. This is the core of the conceptual gap. People think of age-related diseases as a category of diseases, along with congenital and communicable diseases. And they think about the ways in which we might realistically go about combating those diseases as being, having a lot in common with how we might go about combating these. And then they think of the phenomena of aging over here in some kind of other universe with, rather non-specific phenomena such as sarcopenia, the loss of muscle mass with age, or immunosenescence, the decline in function of the immune system, which we don't kind of think of as diseases. This is a misconception, and it is a fabulously damaging misconception. It is, in my view, now that the credibility gap is so rapidly closing, this is the main reason why we are moving so slowly towards a truly post-aging world. This is how we should be thinking of the diseases of old age. They are parts of aging. The only difference between the third column and the fourth column is that the third column are things that we call diseases because we happen to feel like defining the word disease that way. They are part and parcel of aging. And once we start to think of them that way, we will have a very different idea of how to go about partitioning, allocating research funds and medical development funds so as to bring aging under medical control. Ultimately, it's like this. Metabolism, in other words, the normal operation of the human body, creates damage throughout life, which is initially harmless but eventually results in the pathologies of old age. And pretty much everything that we do in the clinic today consists of geriatric medicine to combat those pathologies, treating those diseases as if they were normal diseases. In other words, completely ignoring everything I told you in the past couple of minutes. And lo and behold, it doesn't work. The geriatric medicine world has given us a very limited degree of delay, postponement of the diseases and disabilities of old age, and that's as much as it ever will, simply because the accumulation of damage here, of the precursors of the targets of geriatric medicine, means that any geriatric medicine will inevitably become less and less effective as the patient gets older. Now, I'm by no means the first person to point this out. For perhaps a century now, there have been a few people thinking this way, thinking that maybe prevention is better than cure, and if we can clean up metabolism, slow down the rate at which it creates damage, we'll have a better chance. Unfortunately, that's not a trivial thing either, because metabolism is rather complicated. We all knew this, that you don't have to read this slide, don't worry, that there are lots of things that go wrong with us in old age, the pathologies, but unfortunately, this, as we all know, is also not exactly simple. It is a simplified diagram of a small subset of what we know about how biology actually works. And, of course, that's not the main problem. The main problem is that this is a simplified diagram of a small subset of what we know about how biology works, which is completely dwarfed by the astronomical amount that we don't know, even ignoring the stuff that we don't even know that we don't know. So, you're not going to be able to tweak this thing and get it to create damage substantially more slowly without doing more harm than good in some other way, by tweaking levers, as the Vice-Chancellor told us earlier. So, this is the answer. We've got to start adopting a preventative maintenance approach, an approach that does not try to slow down either this arrow or this arrow, but rather separates them from each other by periodically repairing the damage so that even though metabolism is creating it, it doesn't reach the pathogenic threshold. I believe that that's a realistic approach, and I'm not the only one these days who believes it's a realistic approach. It starts out by characterizing what that damage is. I like this particular classification of the various molecular and cellular changes that build up throughout life and eventually contribute to the ill health of old age. This particular classification is useful, first of all, because it's manageable. There are only 7 classes. But secondly, and most importantly, because within each category, we can talk about a generic therapy, a generic type of way of going about doing the maintenance approach. For example, at the top, cell loss. That simply means cells dying and not being automatically replaced by the division and differentiation of other cells. And, of course, stem cell therapy is the preventative maintenance approach to fixing that problem, putting cells in that will do the job that the body is not doing on its own. Of course, in this very short talk, I don't have time to go down this list, but the classification here has that characteristic throughout. And I do want to emphasize that we have reasonable confidence that this is an exhaustive classification. It's been the same classification for more than 30 years. I've been out there challenging people to add to it for the past 10 or 11 years, and I seem to be getting away with it. So this is pretty good news. Furthermore, the relationship between these classes of damage and the famous and problematic diseases of old age is fairly clear. Sometimes it's a simple one-to-one relationship. Cancer is more or less defined as cells dividing when they're not supposed to. Sometimes you've got organs in which lots of different types of things go wrong during old age for different types of reason, whether it's atherosclerosis, arteriosclerosis, amyloidosis. You know, there's many things that can go wrong. Sometimes you've got diseases which are defined as a complex trait with, for example, tangles and also plaques, and of course now neuronal loss as something that matters. And of course, if we look at the things that we don't call diseases, the same applies. The various aspects of frailty and sarcopenia and so on that I mentioned earlier all ultimately come down to accumulations of these various types of damage. So of course, what really matters is, can we now develop ways to do anything about it? And these are the ways that we are trying to go about doing something about it. Of course, stem cell therapy is a massive and burgeoning field in which Cambridge is one of the leading institutions in the world. Most of these other approaches to the maintenance concept with regard to these other categories of damage are far more neglected. In some cases, SENS Research Foundation is the only organization in the world taking them particularly seriously. But that's got to change if we really want to hasten the arrival of a post-aging world, bring aging under the same level of medical control that we have over most infectious diseases. We need to recognize that the treatment of aging is synonymous with preventative medicine for the diseases of old age. Preventative medicine is not a dirty phrase. The diseases of old age are generally believed to be rather a bad thing. Therefore, you would think that it wouldn't be terribly hard to persuade the biomedical community that we should put effort into preventative medicine for the diseases of old age. But it really isn't happening. It's not happening to nearly the extent it needs to. That's got to change pretty soon. Some people at the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, the US counterpart of the MRC, are trying to change that. But you know, I'm not holding my breath, to be honest, because the vested interests ranged in favour of the status quo are extremely daunting. But this is what we want to create. We want to create a world in which, I'm not just saying nobody gets tuberculosis, nobody gets polio. We're talking about the diseases of old age, which we have had such limited success on so far. There will be dramatic consequences for health span, obviously, for how long people will stay healthy. That will, in all probability, lead to dramatic increases in lifespan. And, of course, my discussions of the magnitude of those increases has got me into a bit of trouble over the years with some of the old guard. But the fact is, it's not something to be scared of, it's something to celebrate. This is becoming credible. This is just by way of illustration our research advisory board, a bunch of extremely high-profile academics with expertise, with world-leading expertise in all the relevant areas. So that's nice. And of course, we are actually making progress in the lab, both in our research center in California and also in the various laboratories that we support around the world, including here in Cambridge. But the fact is, there's still a long way to go. I wish this list could be written in such small font that you wouldn't be able to read it, same as the list of pathologies was, and in due course it will be, but that needs to happen sooner. I wrote a book about this some time ago, which will compensate for the fact that this talk was only 10 minutes long, and of course I would welcome questions, whether now or by email in the fullness of time. Thank you.
Okay, we have time for some questions. So, yeah, I think you need to stand up. Yeah, that's right. So, there's one in the red here.
Thank you so much for your talking. I'm Anna Lewandowska from Poland, studying in Sweden. You've been talking about prolonging the lifespan and treating the diseases, and this is, of course, the fantastic goal to reach, and all of us would like to prolong the lifespan. But on the other hand, we have to face the problem of overpopulation and taking care of the getting old society. What would be your solution for this kind of problems? How would you suggest to face it in the nearest coming, 10, 20 years?
My proposed solution for dealing with the problem of taking care of the elderly is to put the elderly into a state of health where they don't need taking care of. Simple as that. I mean, we have to remember that this is really what the overpopulation problem that we're faced with today comes down to. It's not a problem that there are lots of people over the age of 65. The problem is that there are lots of unhealthy people over the age of 65. They cost an enormous... There's a reason why we pay people to do nothing from the age of 65. The reason is we're very sorry for them. And we're very sorry for them because they're about to get sick and die. Okay, so that's what we need to change. And, you know, it's not just the elderly, of course, it's the kids of the elderly whose productivity is diminished by the fact that they have to take care of their sick parents and so on. Another important thing that I think people often overlook with regard to the prospect of overpopulation and the prospect of its exacerbation by medicine of this nature is that the carrying capacity of the planet is not some fixed, you know, universal constant like the speed of light. It's a function of technology. The problem we have today is not that we have 7 billion people on the planet. The problem is that we have 7 billion people who are polluting the planet quite a lot by, you know, using a lot of fossil fuels and so on. The more we end up being able to use renewable energy, nuclear fusion, whatever it might be, the less we're going to be burning fossil fuels, and we'll be able to have more people on the planet with less environmental impact. Of course, the same applies to all other types of pollution that we inflict. So that is the solution to this problem. I always think that it's really strange that when we look at future progress, we always focus and fixate on the problems that might be created as a side effect of solving the problem at hand. But when this is in the past, we don't think that way. I mean, nobody says that, oh dear, it was a mistake to make what progress we have so far over the past 50 years on heart disease because that has contributed to the size of the Alzheimer's epidemic. People think that the problem now is to fix Alzheimer's, not to undo the progress we made against heart disease. This is the way I think about these problems.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting that I got a call about a year ago from the BBC. It was a sort of anti-science type of idea. The question they asked was, do I not feel guilty for antibiotic resistance bacteria? But, you know, and I said, oh, well, where to start? So I said, well, let's think about the billions of people from infectious disease who've been cured. And then also this notion that somehow there's a little cabal of bacteria nestling in a tree stump somewhere in the Amazon jungle planning their strategy to become resistant because scientists have just made this happen. It was just, yeah. Absolutely ridiculous. Any more questions? Yeah, lots. Let's go for the pink and then for one down there.
Okay. Thanks. Boris Azais from MSD. I was wondering if you gave some thought about the impact of what you're proposing, which is very compelling, that's very clear, on the healthcare system. How should they adapt? Because you're focusing on the research, rightly so, but in a sense, you're probably thinking also, and you've had questions about that.
Sure, yeah. So I have kind of taken solace in the fact that this research is so slow, in the sense that we can, with very good confidence, predict that the arrival of these medicines that will really bring aging under medical control will be preceded by at least a decade during which the progress that has already occurred in the laboratory, especially with mice, has been so decisive that everybody knows it's only a matter of time before we get these medicines, in contrast to today where everyone still tries not to get their hopes up and they, you know, don't really want to think about aging as a medical problem. So in other words, I think that we will get our act together in the time available once that happens. However, that's not to take away from the fact that it would be great if we started getting our act together already. You know, it's going to take a lot of front-loading of investment to build all the infrastructure and reorient the healthcare system and train people in different ways and so on. I absolutely agree with you. I think it's a major difficulty, and the more we have this kind of topic highlighted at influential gatherings like this, the more chance we have for that to happen.
Okay, there's a question here.
Well, thank you very much for the interesting presentation. My question actually relates to the previous one. You talked about the maintenance of damage, but perhaps for the healthcare providers, what is more interesting is the prevention of damage through lifestyle solutions or anything that we might come up with. What do you think of that?
I think it's important to live a healthy life. But the main reason it's important to live a healthy life is to maximize your chance of being around when these medicines come along. You know, really. The thing is that lifestyle, things we have a choice about, like, you know, what you eat and whether you get overweight and so on, don't make all that much difference to how long you live. You know, we often laugh at the USA, which has by far the greatest per capita expenditure on medical care of any Western country, and which nevertheless comes about 30th in the league table of longevity. But in fact, if you look at the actual absolute numbers, the difference between life expectancy in the USA versus Japan is only about 4 years. It's a small amount. So that's not going to be the solution. Just, you know, postponing the ill health of old age by a few years and then having it happen anyway and having all the expense happen anyway is not really the answer. I think we have to remember that ultimately the main things that drive the rate of aging, the rate of accumulation of damage and therefore the age at which these diseases and disabilities emerge, are not negotiable. The number one thing that is bad for us is breathing. Breathing is really bad for you. It creates free radicals. Yeah. Okay.
Hi, it was a very interesting talk. My question is also about the maintenance. Most of your talk was addressed from the point of medication. How about prevention from diagnostic point of view?
Right, so yes, this is related to the previous question. Personalized medicine, we always have to remember, personalized medicine is a stopgap. One needs personalized medicine only when the core medicine that one has, the generic medicine, doesn't work very well. We don't have a personalized polio vaccine because the polio vaccine just works, right? And therefore, yes, I think it's important to understand the extent to which we can optimize, you know, half-hearted therapies, but ultimately the mainline solution is to develop the therapies that just work.
I think there's an important point there because personalized medicine is also very attractive to people who want to make a lot of money. So if you had a sort of one-stop solution for cancer, for example, you wouldn't need all the personalized cancer therapy. And, but of course, a lot less people are going to make a lot of money out of that. So personalizing medicine will keep everybody employed for a long, long time, but I agree with you. I think it's only a stopgap. There's a question back there.
Thank you for your talk, Dr. Gray. My name is Andrew Herr. I'm here from Washington, D.C. One of the discussions here about reversing cellular damage and the effects of aging makes me think there may be some impacts on human performance beyond aging. There's been some interesting reports in the last few months on use of things like valproic acid and donazepam for enhancing neurocognition and reopening critical periods. What do you think the implications are of some of this research on those fields, and what do you think, how would that affect society as well? Thank you.
Yes, it's a fascinating question. Like you, I spend half my life in California and half of it here, and I often notice that this kind of question about enhancement comes up from Americans much more often. But yeah, I mean, it's absolutely true. There is no really hard and fast line to be drawn between therapy and enhancement. The same technologies that will deliver the maintenance of what we can consider normal function are almost certain, in most cases, also to be applicable to the enhancement of function beyond normal. I don't personally have a particular opinion about that. You know, I'm just a practical guy. I don't want to get sick, and I don't want you to get sick either.
I don't know. I mean, I take occasionally modafinil for jet lag. And I have the best days I ever have on modafinil. It's the amount of stuff I can do, and really dull, tedious. You just work through it. Whether or not you call that enhancement, I don't know. Anyway.
Hi, can I? Sorry, back here.
So just because it is a summit for being disruptive, I actually don't agree with the fact that personalized healthcare is to keep people employed and more money and stuff like that. It's just the opposite, right? Is following the science. And when you think about the pharmaceutical company, it was the whole era of blockbuster. It's a lot easier. Give the same medicines to everybody. You'll get a lot more money, right? Where the personalized healthcare is where the industry really started following the science. And I think the science is telling us not everybody is the same, not every disease is the same, and you have to pay attention to that.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I think the burgeoning of personalized medicine may be profitable for a large number of people, but only with a considerable reorganization of how the system actually works. At the moment, it is indeed set up within the philosophy of the blockbuster drug model. And of course, we do know that the blockbuster drug model is fundamentally failing, and so something's got to change. And I think that's really good for regenerative medicine in general, which is ultimately what I'm talking about. But yes, for personalized medicine too.
Back here. Hi, I'm Manuel, a PhD student in tumor immunology in Switzerland. So my question was that let's assume when I'm old, you're ready with your drugs, which would of course be great, but what will I finally die of?
Oh, being hit by a truck, you know, asteroid impact. Actually, being a little more serious, I think that the advent of a world, even the anticipation of a world in which aging no longer kills almost everybody in the developed world anyway, will have an enormous impact on how seriously we take other causes of death. So we just heard about antibiotics, you know, about the so-called debate about antibiotic resistance and so on. The fact is, we just don't spend nearly enough on vaccine research and so on. These things are not profitable enough, and that's a choice that society is fundamentally making, albeit perhaps sleepwalking into, because the fact is, not very many people die of infections, except in old age, when it's, of course, secondary to being old in the first place. If that were no longer true, if infections were the #1 cause of death, again, the way they used to be 200 years ago, I suspect we'd be putting a great deal more effort into vaccine research and related matters.
Okay, I think we're going to have to leave it now. Thank you very much, Aubrey. That's great.